Welcome to the Dealer Playbook Podcast. My name is Michael Cirillo, and each week I sit down with the brightest minds in marketing, sales, and leadership to help you level up your career in automotive. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me today. Now let's open up the playbook. Here we go. Hey Blair, what's going on? Thanks for joining me on the Dealer Playbook Podcast.
Hi, Michael. My pleasure to be here.
You know what? I was surfing the web one night looking for individuals who have power bomb information. Came across you. I think I watched one of your presentations at a conference you presented at, and I was like, okay, I need to get this dude on. And then after I reached out to you, you were like, hey, I'm Canadian. And I was like, dude, you see how things roll? And then you said, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was you that said, and I've even worked in the auto industry before.
Yeah, first of all, I'm not just Canadian. I'm in British Columbia, and I'm in an even smaller part of British Columbia than you. I'm in a little village of less than 1,000 people.
Okay, so is it like Caslow or something like that?
Yeah, it's Caslow.
Are you in Caslow?
Yeah.
There you go. Nice. Right on.
And you're in the metropolis of Vernon.
Yeah, that's right.
I drive through Vernon all the time on my way to Kelowna, where I'm usually getting on a plane.
Oh, well, there you go. You'll have to stop into the office and say hi when you're on your next way through.
I'll make a point of doing that. But yeah, so after we talked about me coming on the show, I did volunteer that I did spend 6 years in retail automotive advertising, actually dealer networks, tier 2 dealer networks. So I know that space well. And at that second tier, at the dealer group level, you get a lot of experience going up and down the brand stuff, working with the factory guys and the individual dealers and what they're doing to promote the dealership. And then us guys at the tier 2 level caught in the middle.
Yeah. So what I love about this is, having that experience. By the way, I mean, the name of your company is very rarely do you find a name of a company or a name of a book or anything like that just kind of sucks you in. And so when I saw the Win Without Pitching Manifesto, I was like, okay, well, this is perfect for the auto industry because I feel like all we know how to do is pitch. So I want to turn this over to you. I'm reading this right off your website. You can check it out. Winwithoutpitching. Is it .ca or .com? I don't have the .com. So winwithoutpitching.com. Right on the first thing you see. This book is a rallying cry to creative professionals worldwide to throw off the shackles of the pitch, to regain the high ground in their relationship with their clients and prospects, and summon the profit, professionalism, and respect that has long eluded them. And then I go to buy. It's like, so I want to turn this over to you. We've had guests on the show previous to this that share the sentiment, and I believe in the idea of build relationships of trust. But turning this over to you, how does one throw off the shackles of the pitch? I mean, like we just want to do it. That's what comes to us naturally, is just to sell.
Yeah. Well, the pitch specifically, it's got a bunch of different terms. So Win Without Pitching, the target audience for that book, and where, coming out of automotive advertising, the target audience is the creative professional. So there's the creative pitch, there's the pitch in the money business when you're trying to raise money, and then there's there's a pitch in a more general sense. There's the pitch in a sale, and really, the idea was around that first one, the creative pitch, but the principles largely apply across. Not so much the money pitch; that's a little bit different, sure. Perhaps. I don't know that business all that well, but in selling, when you look at pitching. It really calls into question, what it means to sell. So I think all strategy is autobiographical. We're all kind of driven by our own personal demons, or more correctly, needs or motivational makeups.
Right.
So you can take all kinds of different salespeople in selling different products and services, different situations, and a lot of them are going to sell differently based on a lot of these innate characteristics. And I think if you're in the car business, you probably see yourself as a bit of a natural salesperson. You probably have a higher than average competitor drive. Therefore, you probably look at selling as a little bit, at least, as the art of persuasion. And I'm, again, all strategy is autobiographical. I'm a lower competitive drive person. Therefore, I'm more patient. And I might be too patient to actually sell cars. My competitive drive would need to be higher. My personal approach is that everybody's buying. The only variable is time. So it's only a matter of time. That's not a really great approach to a sales manager or a dealer who's looking at 10-day reports or monthly sales reports.
Right.
Right. So I take a long view towards selling, and the approach that we do in the Win Without Pitching program, which is an ongoing sales training program for creative professionals, we take a longer view. Now, so you have to take a longer view, but you have to bring some urgency in the situation if you lack that urgency naturally, which I do. But the challenge of you can view selling as the art of talking somebody into something, or you can view selling as facilitation of facilitating and helping. And I'm sure you've had other guests on the show have talked about that before. Right. And I think for you to kind of ditch the pitch, you really need to see your role as somebody who's an expert facilitator of helping the client get what they want. And you have to acknowledge certain things like, you know what, I might not be able to help this person directly. So the way for me to help them is to steer them some other place. And that begs a whole bunch of questions about the automotive business. And one of them is compensation, right? It's hard to do that if you're on a fully leveraged comp plan where you're just straight commission.
Yeah. And so do you think that one piece there is what adds this layer of impatience to the mix, right? Like you mentioned the 10-day reports and everything in the car business moving in these 30-day cycles, month open, month close. I have to sell. I got to get my, 12 units, my 21 units, my 30 units out this month. But is there a way to adopt the philosophy of win without pitching into this framework that's already been kind of built around these sales professionals, whereby they can become more facilitating and less like feature, advantage, benefit, sell?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I was still in the business, and this is going back maybe 15 years ago now, and so I only know how things have changed from being on the buying side now and not being on the selling side. It's been quite a while since I've been on the selling side. And the last car I bought didn't go through a dealer network at all. It was direct through the manufacturer.
Go ahead. What are you driving?
I'm driving a Tesla Model S.
Oh man, and the that dash is just so sexy.
Yeah, it's. I'm not a car guy per se, which is, I come out of the car business and I worked with a lot of car guys and I get it. And I love beautiful things. And every once in a while a car comes along and you go, that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. Like, we could name models all there. There are lots of beautiful cars that have been designed over the years. And this is a beautiful thing. And one of the things that's beautiful about it is it's so disruptive. It's so representative of the future. And I don't know how much time we want to spend talking about that, but
a lot, because I'm still like, oh, I want one of those. No, I'm just kidding. So, but what was it that made you? What was it? Was it strictly that what you just said that kind of pushed you in that direction, or was there something about, or was there some other deciding factor where you're like, you know what, I'm gonna do the direct to consumer model versus?
No, I didn't choose the direct-to-consumer model. I chose Tesla because they're disruptive of transportation in general. Coming from the automotive world, I kind of fell into the tier 2 stuff. And at first I thought, I'm not sure if I really belong here. I felt like a little bit of fish out of water. But then I looked at what was going on in the brand side, and I thought my colleagues who are in the brand division of the large agency I worked at, I was thinking, you guys have your heads up your nether regions. Like, you don't have the reality of, You talk about brand all day, all the usual arguments.
Yeah.
And then I would look at the stuff that the dealers are doing, and I would say, are you kidding me? Like inflatable gorillas? Really? So I didn't belong in either of those tier 1 or tier 3 worlds. So eventually I felt quite at home at tier 2. So, I wasn't in going with Tesla. I just, I'm a big fan of Elon Musk. I look at this guy and I think I want to go where he's going, and I wanted to support him. So that was my choice.
And I guess you could argue the dude won without pitching.
Yeah, I don't know how to translate that to. I just finished reading Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, Notes on Startups in the Future, and he begins that book. We're really talking about the idea of pure competition versus a creative monopoly, and he says if you launch something into the market that isn't 10x better in some way, then it's just seen as incremental, and you're inviting all kinds of competition. And I know dealers live in that. It's basically an environment of perfect competition. We have all these pressure on margins. It's coming not just from your competitors from the other makes, but also sometimes within depending on where you are, and you're competing against dealers within your own space. And then online, I remember giving a presentation years ago to a whole bunch of car dealers from across the country saying this thing called the internet, it's coming, and it's going to change the way you sell cars. Some of your current customers will buy their next car on the internet. Now that was 20 years ago, and it took longer to happen, but I bought my last car.
They're still kind of having that conversation right now. It's still catching people off guard today, but just to add that in there.
Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But I bought my last car online. I spec'd it out, etc. I went in the store, had conversations, but I bought it online.
Okay, so breaking this down, if you look at, and not even just car sales professionals, but real estate agents, small business owners, the guy that owns the mountain bike store, how do they integrate the philosophy of Win Without Pitching into what they're currently doing? Or is this something that should overtake what they've currently been doing to see better results or more sustainability?
The whole Win Without Pitching approach, it's a mindset. And I've had people, and it's sometimes a polarizing mindset. And I think when you get into something as transactional as retail automotive or real estate, you're going to get a lot of people who say, you know what, that approach isn't for me. Or even stronger language, I don't believe it. Like we're talking about truths. We're not talking about truths. We're talking about a point of view on selling that may actually be a little bit out of place, certainly within mainstream retail automotive. Mm-hmm. But I would think that there's that point of view that selling is helping, it's facilitating, it's not talking people into things. I'm fond of saying in my job as salesperson for my company, and I used to say this when I was doing sales in ad agencies, I used to say, hey, it's not my job to talk you into hiring us. It's not my job. And I say to people, it's not your job as salesperson. You shouldn't be trying to talk anybody into anything ever. Now, that's a point of view. And it's a point of view that stems from who I am and my motivational makeup. And it correlates really nicely to the research in complex B2B sales. So in a complex B2B sale, I can prove to you that this approach that I advocate is more effective. Is it necessarily more effective in retail automotive? I suspect over the long run it is, provided that you still brought that urgency to the situation. Like when I was in the business 15, 20 years ago, I remember reading Bob Tasca's book, You Will Be Satisfied. And I don't know if that's still talked about in the automotive circles. But he proposed this idea, this radical idea that salespeople should be paid based on customer satisfaction and not based on sales. So his story, and if your audience hasn't read it, it might be one of these. I was talking to a social media person recently about Marshall McLuhan, and he said, who? And I thought, my God, if social media people are not reading Marshall McLuhan, like wait, he's the father of social media. He foresaw this stuff, right? Everything you're experiencing, he talked about in 1969. And I would say similar things about Bob Tasca's book, You Will Be Satisfied, about the importance of customer satisfaction and delegating the ability to satisfy the client to the lowest level of the organization. And again, his so what Tasca's story is, he built the number one performing Ford store in all of the USA. I forget on what metrics. I think it's sales per square foot or whatever it is.
Okay.
And then I think it was in Rhode Island. And then he sold his he sold his store, and he bought a really poor performing store, also in New England. And he wanted to see if he could replicate his own success without firing anybody. And he did. He took his crappy new store without letting anybody go. He turned it into the number one store in the country, and he put his old store out of business in the process. Took a while. And they weren't in direct competing markets, but they were in the kind of the broader New England.
Right.
So when I was in the car business and seeing all of the things that I thought were uncomfortable about selling and buying and therefore selling, Tasca was kind of ahead of the curve on these issues and talking about the importance of customer satisfaction. And so you need to have people who are kind of motivated that way. So like when I talk about my point of view on selling as facilitating rather than talking people into things, if you don't fundamentally see sales that way, then put this aside and go with what works for you. Right. So you have to fundamentally believe that.
You know what? It's funny what you say though, and it resonates with me because and this is the philosophy we have at my agency here. I don't like to be I feel like if you have to sell something, then it probably wasn't that good. Do you know what I mean? Like you're just in this perpetual loop of convincing the other party that what you have is good. Versus I think of the purchases that I've made that were based on a foundation of a good relationship with the individual. Like there's also that part of it. I don't know the psychology of it, but there's that part of it where you're like, yeah, and I want to see this person succeed and I want to help them out. And you mentioned longevity, and that's how I kind of see all of this plays into it. I mean, we look at when the markets crashed in, 08, 09 and dealerships, there were 20 some odd thousand new car dealerships in the United States alone. And then we go all the way down to 16,000. There were so many that closed up shop. And I think about how things were done up to that point and how they're still being done today. It's almost like the difference between wealth and rich. Like they're hey, get in, urgency, make the sale, close it down, ink up. There's no relationship. There's no longevity. On the other hand, wealth requires patience. It requires strategic thought, goal setting, action, step by step, line upon line kind of a thing to help you get to where you want to go to the degree that you don't have to hustle the same way. I mean, you don't. It's just longer lasting, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I glean from this. It's the concept of building relationships. I think is really what's standing out to me. From what you're talking about is there's just that foundation for a relationship of trust when you facilitate the acquisition of information or whatever it is that your customer's looking for versus being like, yeah, absolutely. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions to make sure that this vehicle's right for you? It's like, oh man, it's so tacky.
Yeah. What's happening in those situations, whether it's a car or you're buying something else where you're uncomfortable, it's usually a combination of two things. It's somebody who's got a really high competitive drive. So they're really internally motivated to convert you to their point of view and to like get you to buy from them. Right. So it starts with internal motivation, and then you add on top of that a compensation plan that says you don't get to feed your kids unless you talk somebody into something. And so that's, if you think of all of the icky situations you've been in as a buyer, it's almost always a combination of those two things. So,
it's fear. It's like driven by fear versus driven by vision almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the win without pitching approach is, if we just kind of forget about the creative pitch and just think about the philosophies, like some of the things I'm fond of saying, you can present to somebody or you can be present to them, but you can't be both. Right? So you can present to somebody or you can be present to them. You can't be both. So whenever you find yourself in presentation mode, you are not listening. You are not being present to them. And I think there's all kinds of different models for selling. You can take different kind of social science models and apply them to selling. And I borrow a lot from different models of change, but one in particular called the trans-theoretical model of change. I really believe that buying, if you want to find a model for how people, like a scientific model for how people buy, look at changing. Buying is changing. So if you study changing, if you believe that, then you will understand that selling is change management. And in the last 15 years or so, there have been lots of great change management models, and you could just pick any one of them and study that model, and you would become a better salesperson. And another way to look at selling is leadership. So if you can be a fan of any of these like leadership gurus, John C. Maxwell, I don't know who they all are, but there's a lot of people who write books on leadership, Jack Welch, and you can read those books and you can take any of their models and you can apply them to sales, and you'll become far more effective. And there's I forget where I've borrowed this from, but I talk about the physiology of leadership, back to being present. You can think of two axes. On one axis, you are calm or you're anxious, and on the other axis, you are present or you're absent. And the physiology of leadership, which applies great to sales, is calm presence, right? So you're calm and you're completely tuned in to the client. And being tuned in, I just did a conference call for the people who are in our, we do a weekly focus call. So for everybody who's in our sales training program, every Monday morning we get on, it's not mandatory, but one of us on the coaching side says, this week we're going to talk about X. This week we're going to focus on X. And my focus for the week that I had our students focus on is moving off or letting go of the solution. And so what I mean by that is you find yourself, there's somebody out on the lot looking at a car, you walk up to this person, you immediately start, they're looking at X, so you're thinking X, but you're also thinking, well, maybe I can move them up to the Y. You're immediately making assumptions about, what you're going to try to sell to this person or what you're going to steer them towards. And then you think of the current incentives that are available. You might steer them that way, right? So one of the things we talk about is just let go of solutions. You can't be, if you're thinking about what you might sell to this person, then you're not present to this person, right? So if you want to invoke the physiology of leadership, which is calm presence, you need to move off of the solution. So you need to walk up that person and begin at the beginning and find out what that person really, really wants. And then only once you get from them what they want, what they're willing to pay, generally speaking, then you start talking about solutions.